Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to the All Things Policy podcast. And in today's episode, we are joined by Smita Chakraborty, founder at PAAR, Prison Aid Action Research, which is a non-partisan research and advocacy organization focused on prison reforms and open prison advocacy. Let's hear from Smita herself on how this initiative came about, the concept of open prisons and why it works, and how it helps us rethink fundamental questions of law, justice, and punishment. And of course, to understand the public policy perspective in the context of public finance and its social consequences. Smita, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Hi, Carl. Thank you for inviting me today for this talk. Yes, it makes a lot of sense having a conversation on open prison right now, especially when we are and there are a lot of students or people interested in policy work involved in it, because we're actually working on changing this policy or influencing policy regarding prisons. That's essentially what PAAR is doing at the moment.
That's interesting. I mean, so you've been working on prisons for more than a decade. So before we get to the subject matter, which is the open prison system or the model, right, that your organization advocates for, can you share with us how this became a passion project for you?
Working on open prison came in much later. But my initial days, I've started working inside prison ever since I was a student. It was a part of my graduation dissertation paper. Because while in my growing up years, like when I was in college, I'm from West Bengal, Calcutta. And at that point, there was a political turmoil happening in West Bengal. And there was a land grab. There was this problem happening, and all the students were a part of that protest. And a lot of my seniors I'm from Presidency College, Calcutta, and it's a pretty, we were very politically opinionated when we were in college. And at that point, a lot of my seniors were being harassed by the police, were being picked up. So I started working on documenting police violence. Custodial violence was my dissertation topic. And when I delved deeper into it, it was my professor who suggested that I should be working on prison and not custodial violence in general, because police lockup is a very small, it's a very small area. So it actually happened organically. So because of my research and my dissertation work, and I had to start visiting prisons. And then I realized that prison, when I was in college, I actually used to think that my college identity card is like the super gateway to any place I wanted to go, because we were actually treated pretty well in Calcutta just because we had that, we were a part of a certain institution. So I thought that I'll be invited with open arms in prison, and which I was not. So I had to find a way to visit prison. I had to go approach the High Court. The High Court judge, the then sitting acting Chief Justice of West Bengal, was extremely supportive. He allowed me permission to visit prison, and which also gave additional. There was a sense of importance. Like I was 21 years old and I was visiting prison. I had permission from the High Court, so you feel that you're doing something extremely important just by visiting prison. And then the judge also had told me that if you get any complaints, if you want anything, any help from the court, just let me know. So that gave me a sense of authority as well, that when I was visiting prison, my understanding was that most of them would be political prisoners, but they were not. My idea was prisoners like we see in movies, that there'll be gangsters and extremely brutal, vicious looking people. It wasn't like that. My first interaction with a group of prisoners, there was a man who was 85 years old, and he was wearing spectacles, which was much smaller in size compared to his face. Maybe he was wearing a spectacle of a child, like maybe a 5-year, 6-year-old child. And he was tying the specs with a piece of thread, and obviously the power did not match his requirement. So he came saying that if I can speak to the High Court and get him specs. And I didn't know how to respond to him, because he was physically He couldn't stand. He was physically infirm, and he was 85 years old. He was undergoing life sentence. He didn't pose any threat to the society. He didn't match any of my understanding or imagination of how a prisoner should look. And I think that moment, that conversation that I had with him, I think changed my entire perspective on prison. So I took a letter from him. I went back to the High Court. Can you imagine, like, to get specs for one inmate, one has to like take a letter to the High Court, and the acting Chief Justice then says that he must be given specs. So it felt very disturbing. And after that, I continuously visited prison, and prisoners would write to me. If I didn't visit prison, they would ask after me. So I felt like there was this responsibility that I had to meet people who didn't have visitors. So it was a very emotional attachment that I had with them. And my reputation among the High Court judges also grew, because there were times when I was invited by the West Bengal Human Rights Commission to investigate custodial death. So yes, and so then during my master's, my post-graduation also, this was my topic, death station topic. When I joined my PhD, it was on same topic. So I had academically got invested in it. Right. And then my biggest break happened when the Chief Justice of Bihar asked me, Patna High Court, he asked me to inspect the prisons of the state of Bihar. So I went to Bihar. At that point, I used to teach in a college. I was teaching in Loreto College. It was and I was doing my PhD at the same time. And I thought that I'll go to Bihar, and within a week or 2 weeks, I'll come back after visiting a couple of prisons. But on the first week, when I submitted my initial report to Justice Sinha, V.N. Sinha, he said that, there are 58 prisons, and I think you should inspect all the 58 prisons of the state of Bihar. And I want to do this. And so I thought it'll take me years to finish this work. But nonetheless, I chose to do that because it was something I really wanted to do. At that point, I had to quit my job. Eventually I had to quit my PhD also, and I was just visiting prisons every day. Now, that was a turning point in my life, because it was a risk that I took at that point, like giving up a career of academics, having a nice job, and giving up a lecturership at a prestigious college. But it turned out very well, because the Supreme Court of India took cognizance of that report, the Bihar Prison Report, which was published by the Bihar High Court. So the court made it mandatory for all states to conduct Bihar-like prison inspections. Yeah. Because it was historically the first time a social researcher was inspecting prisons and reporting directly to a High Court judge. And so it was like I was a third party, so I was not a stakeholder. So it was a absolutely independent report. So yes, it worked out very well. And then immediately I was getting calls from multiple high courts of the country. And at that point, I was also invited by the Parliamentary Standing Committee, Department of Law and Justice. So they were actually discussing legal aid in prison. And I was invited, and I had an invitation from Rajasthan. So since Rajasthan is like closer to Delhi, I just took a bus from Delhi and came to Rajasthan thinking that I'll just speak to the High Court judge, spend around 2-3 days and go back to Calcutta. So that was 2016. And yeah, I'm still staying in Rajasthan. And I have a house over here right now.
Yeah. So, I think the Rajasthan story is where PAAR, the idea of PAAR came about. Yes. So I think it'll be interesting for us to just maybe delve into the actual work that goes into prison reforms and how you've been advocating, for this. So, in terms of, some numbers that I have in front of me. So we know that less than 1% are habitual offenders. Yes. This is according to the 2019 statistics, right, at the national level. But what is disturbing also is that about 50% of them are, in fact, one-time or accidental offenders, right? So how does the current prison system landscape in India contribute to this problem?
See, presently, the prisons, if you see, like there are more than 75%, 76% actually, according to the latest NCRB report, are under trial prisoners, which means we are not even sure whether these people have perpetrated any offense or not. And it's actually very difficult because an under trial prisoner is mostly an individual who comes from a marginalized background. They are in prison because they couldn't afford a lawyer during their first court production. I'll just explain it to simplify it. Say, if I get arrested today, by the time I'm taken to the police station, my lawyer will come to my rescue. You see? So that is the first interaction with the law. So what happens is when you're taken to the police is supposed to produce the individual within first 24 hours of arrest. Now the individual usually doesn't have access to a lawyer during this stage of production. This is the first stage. And then they get into prison, their family don't know about it. So it starts off like that. So there's an unnecessary arrest, there's an unnecessary denial of bail, there is a blanket, there's paper production in most of the cases. During the first initial after arrest, there are certain protocols that the court is supposed to maintain. Like an accused has to be medically examined, accused has to be provided a legal aid, an accused has to be the judge in the court needs to speak to the accused, asking about his welfare, whether he's aware of his rights. Now, all these things doesn't happen in the court because the courts are extremely overburdened. So the accused is, if he doesn't have a lawyer coming to the police station or to the court, then he just mechanically goes to the court, mechanically stands inside a courtroom without any interaction with the judge, and mechanically all the bails are rejected because there is no time for hearing of the bail.
Sure.
So you can't even blame the judge over here. The criminal justice system is an extremely resource-stretched, it's that overburdened system. So then the man just mechanically goes inside prison, and the trial gets longer and longer because there's a certain period which is required before a trial starts. And now there are necessary court productions which happen every 15 days when the individual is in prison. Now, as I said, 75% of prisoners, 70 to 75% of prisoners are under trial prisoners. When the person is in prison, when a prisoner can't just walk up to the court, he needs to be escorted by a police guard in a police van, taken from the prison and produced in the court. Now, the number of police vans and police guards are not equivalent to the number of prisoners far exceed the number of availability of police guards and police vans. So what happens is court productions don't happen. So their trial is delayed. So in one of our studies, we saw that less than 50% prisoners, 1 in 2 prisoners, don't get the opportunity of going to court. So that is a complete denial of fair trial, right? So I am not present in court in my trial. I can't defend myself in court. I don't have an access to lawyer. I'm not going to court. I'm not understanding what is happening in my case. So that leads to conviction. And it's just a system which just overcrowds, leads to more and more burden on resources, leads to further overcrowding. And it's a regressive system. It's a dark cycle. There's no way of breaking out of it. So the only way of breaking out of it is either you have an influential lawyer, or you have the sufficient means and resources to get your own legal defense. That is a solution. The government provides legal aid lawyer, but then the quality of lawyering is something that we would need to question. So yes, which means that if you're not affluent enough, it works that way. So if you're from a poor, marginalized background, the possibility is that you'll be arrested time and again, and you'll be convicted. You'll end up being convicted in the criminal justice system.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not a fair system at all.
Oh. No, I think the social biases is a very important part of this conversation, right? And I think I happened to come across this theory called the cycle of change, based on the groundwork that you have done and your observation from visiting these prisons.
And with this, we take a short break. Meanwhile, you enjoyed this episode, we are accepting applications for our graduate public policy programs. The upcoming cohort will begin in September, so if you want to learn about the nuances of defense and diplomacy, do check our Defense and Foreign Affairs program. And if you want to decode the mystery of policy and economy, we've got the advanced public policy for you. For all further information, you can visit our website, takshashila.org.in.
So let's talk about this in the context of the open prison system, for instance, right?
Yes. Okay.
How does this theory, how do you put this into practice when you talk about open prison system?
See, we were actually, since it is a resource intensive system and we have sufficient experience of prison inspections, like we have inspected prisons of Rajasthan, we have inspected prisons of Bihar, we've inspected prisons of West Bengal. So these are like large states. And more or less, the prison problems are the same. Like prisons, there's overcrowding, the percentage of under trials are very high. There is lack of police guard, police security. Prisons are understaffed, who are overburdened. So, I mean, these are long-standing bottlenecks in the prison system, and it can't be, dealt with. But open prison comes in as a solution to the existing prison system. Now, say if you change the narrative a little bit, so if you change the focus, so if you see the number of convicted prisoners, I just explained who are these convicted prisoners. They are majorly people who didn't have a fair trial, who can't afford a fair trial. Let's say that. And these people are usually people who have perpetrated accidental offense. If at all they have perpetrated an offense, it is an accidental offense, or there was no criminal conspiracy involved in this offense. So there was a lapse of judgment. It was an accidental offense, which might lead to life sentences or long sentences. Now, the majority of convicted prisoners, the composition is either they are convicted for murder or they're convicted under sections of the NDPS Act. Now, the NDPS Act itself, it deals with drugs, right? So it itself is an extremely flawed law over there, because you're actually convicting people who were caught with like small quantities, or who are not a part of the larger drug trafficking racket, who don't even know how this racket runs, but they are people who are locally available. Like they might be college kids, they might be youngsters, or people who live on the streets, people who are peddling drugs, who are against who have access to small quantities of drugs. But they get arrested time and again, so they become, like repeat offenders, and then they end up in prison serving long sentences. Then there are people who are convicted for murder, but these murders were actually, which is amounted from, say, land-related fights, and where both parties were injured. So if somebody died, succumbed to the injuries in a hospital, the person who is alive becomes a murderer and has a life sentence. So usually what I'm trying to say is, like, these are people who get convicted. So the demography of convicted prisoners are people, if you see, like 81% of them are people who have no previous criminal antecedent. So they have no crime history. They pose no threat to the society, and it might be seen as a one-time offense, because by the very nature of the offense, or how the incident of crime is, then it's unlikely that the individual is going to perpetrate a similar offense in the future. So if one evaluates these cases, and nearly 50% of prisoners are people who are not a part of an organized crime or a very heinous, gruesome offense. They are not part of those kind of offenses, but nonetheless they are convicted. Actually shift them to an open prison, because the chances are that they are not. So that is why rate of recidivism, that means reoffending, staying in an open prison, is very low. So if you shift these people to an open prison, the cost of prison management, it actually reduces the burden on the prison system. So that way, the more the number of inmates you're shifting to open prison, the lesser your expenditure in the closed prison. So it's inversely proportionate that way. And in reality, the government of any state, they spend around 7,000 to 10,000 rupees per month per prisoner in a closed prison. Whereas in an open prison, and this 10,000 rupees is not inclusive of the infrastructure cost. We didn't calculate that.
Sure.
But of course, if you put the maintenance cost of the building and electricity, then it'll be like, if we divide it, it'll be like 20,000 rupees per prisoner per month. I mean, I don't know, there are many Indian families who can actually afford that kind of money to their own family member, you see. But that's what the state spends to maintain a closed prison, and the outcome is extremely negative. And but if you send the inmate to an open prison where you're providing a basic quarter, just living, an open prison means an area which is demarcated as an open prison, It can be a clay hut. It can be a tenement. It can be a small 12 feet by 10 feet room, which is allotted as a prisoner quarter. And the prisoner has to stay with their families in these quarters. They have to provide for their own electricity bill. They will have to provide, they'll have to pay for water tax, electricity, and maintenance of that prison is the responsibility of the prisoner. So that way what happens is cost per prisoner per month in an open prison is around 500 rupees. So the government spends 500 rupees when a prisoner is there in an open prison, and the government spends around 10,000 rupees by conservative estimates when the prisoner is staying in a closed prison. So, you see the difference, right? So the more the number of people are shifted to an open prison, the lesser the burden on the existing traditional prison system, which leads to better management of a closed prison. So that's why we are calling it a cycle of change, because then year on year, your expense on maintaining the closed prison goes down. You see, for any budget of any institution, year on year, the budget goes up. But here we are saying, since the more and more prisoners you are sending in an open prison, the lesser your budget. So it's reducing your budget on a yearly basis.
On your basis, yeah.
Which actually inversely leads to better management of prison system.
Yeah.
Again, in an open prison, the prison guard and prisoner ratio is 1:80. So you need one prison guard for 80 prisoners. Whereas in a closed prison, the ideal ratio is 1:6. So one guard per 6 prisoners. So you see, the open prison system is also less human resource intensive. You don't even need much, because it's a low security prison, right? It's because it's a trust-based model that you have over there. And it's been fantastic. And that's exactly what happened. Like when I came to Rajasthan, I was thinking of inspecting the prisons. That's what the Rajasthan High Court had invited me for. But then the DG prison at that time was Mr. Ajit Singh. He said, I would want you to visit a prison, and there are prisoners who we have to evict prisoners, and I don't want to do that. Probably we'll have to do a lathi charge. I really don't want to do that. If you can convince them to peacefully vacate the prison, it'll be nice. And I was like, what? I just came from Bihar. I spoke to 30,000 prisoners on record. Can't imagine any prisoner saying that they want to prolong their stay in the prison. So I was like, sir, I really want to visit. This prison seems very odd. And he was like, yeah, but this is a problem we have. So when I went to the prison, it was surprising because the superintendent took me to this like a village. And I was standing over there. I was thinking that the superintendent will take me to the prison eventually. I was standing over there having chai. And something was written in Hindi. I can't read Hindi, so I didn't understand. That was already... So then I told the superintendent, sir, I understand you're, chai, you're offering me tea and all that. But when do we visit the prison and speak to the prisoners? Because I'm getting late. I have to go back and also report to the court, calm hai. And the guy said, so yehi hai prison, you are in the prison. So this is the... And I was like, this doesn't look like a prison at all. So it was, my first experience of an open prison was, it's a village. It's a prison without bars, locks. There were no prison guards. There were no big, gates, no tall walls. It was nothing. And I was like, how can this be a prison at all? And then the prisoners, they came with their families and they were saying, I have my daughter's board exams are there. So can you extend my stay by 6 months? I really can't shift right now because her exams will get affected. Right. And somebody said, I'm working in so-and-so place. And if I shift right now, go back to my village, I will lose my job. I will not get a better. And I was like, oh my God, this is really not happening because it was so unreal. And then I realized, so I came back and I told the High Court Chief Justice that, sir, can I study the open prisons in Rajasthan? And he was like, yeah, open prison kya hai? And I was like, yeah, this is something, that's why I want to study because I haven't come across this ever. And he was like, yeah, so there are no guards, there's nothing.
And isn't the largest open prison in Sanganer, Rajasthan?
Yes.
This is in the world, if I'm not.
Yes, exactly. So when I studied, I realized that this is the largest open prison, not only in India, it's the largest open prison in the world. It actually throws a challenge to, when we studied about prisons, we thought that Scandinavian prison models, like the Norwegian prisons, they are fantastic open prisons. But, it's like they keep 20 prisoners, there's a gym, there is a library. Here in Sanganer, there are 200 prisoners and it's a community living. And there is a school inside the prison. There is an Anganwadi inside the prison. There is children's school inside prison where people from the locality send their children to these schools and this school because it's a government school and it was ideally meant for prisoner children. But like so, at least I think there are around 45 students in that school, and like there are 7 children which belong to prisoner families. I mean, who belong to prisoner families, but majority of them come from outside. Even the school teacher said, like, initially when I used to come to the school, I used to feel scared, like, am I entering a prison to teach? And then now I feel this is the best place to come because, and the prisoners staying in the open prison, they get work in the locality because people tend to trust them more. Like there are prisoners who work as security guards in the nearby area. And they are, you must understand that these are prisoners who are convicted for murder.
Yeah.
And they work as security guards in the local area. And when you ask the security agency or the local housings that, why are you using prisoners as your security guards? And they say, these are people, they just stay here. They have an I card and they come from prison. So, ye bhag ke kahan jayenge? They are the safest and best people who we can use. And then there are prisoners, they have their own dabas, like restaurants, and some of them have SUVs. So, I mean, different categories of prisoners stay in Sanganer. It's like it's an open community.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a humane alternative. It's a cost-effective alternative. Rate of recidivism is negligible over there because people don't run away from an open prison because we are using liberty as an incentive in an open prison. Like liberty is the incentive in an open prison. Equality or dignity is an incentive in an open prison. These are extremely you can't evaluate these.
Absolutely.
These are tangible achievements, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of maybe giving this a name, if it's a Netflix series, it would be Prison Stay instead of a Prison Break in many ways. That's interesting. Smita, so I just wanted to now maybe with one final question on this, and that's really on how you've articulated how the prisoners' experience of being in a closed prison has a lot of social stigma that is attached to it. So how do you think as policy professionals and just generally as citizens, how do we sensitize ourselves to this concept of open prison systems and help us redefine questions of law, punishment, justice? So what is the advocacy that PAAR is currently engaged in that helps citizens and policy professionals that kind of sensitize to this problem?
See, the first thing is it's an uphill task for us because a prison, like you see, it's represented in movies and Netflix and all of that are like extremely gruesome, very well planned serial killers that we are dealing with. But in reality, the prisoners are extremely, extremely simple, down to earth people. And that needs to be understood. So we have this social media platform. It's called Open Prison Voices on Instagram, where prisoners come and tell their own stories in the first person. And we also discuss, like we put off nuggets of information on factual policy information, like budget or number of under trial prisoners or first time offenders. So the strategy that PAAR has taken up is that we have a social media platform. We are also creating animation movies to simplify the concept of, because criminal law is a very complex area of work. And here we are talking about open prisons, which a lot of people just shudder to the idea of an open prison because their understanding of a prisoner is very low. So our first attempt is to build a body of research on prison, which is not there. If you want to find out about more and more prisons, more information on prison, you'll not find that. So we are creating that extremely detailed archive and information on prison. But on the front end, we're also trying to humanize the prisoner, where we bring out interviews or say, Instagram reels of prisoners they're working or, they're staying with their families. It's a very nice kind of a thing. And we would want people to see, crime and the entire, I would say the entire criminal justice system, actually crime is an incident, right? And the criminal justice, so the police is investigating an incident. When the case goes to the court is actually examining an incident. So an open prison is actually removing an individual from that incident, right? So our focus is on the individual, not the incident, because one individual can't be determined by one, say, stray incident in his or her life. Now, that's a way of thinking. So if you think that the entire court, the criminal trial, the prosecution, the defense, the police, everybody is working on that crime, which is an incident. And we are trying to change the focus of this is an individual and removing the individual from that incident. So it's a better way of dealing with the entire gravity of the problem of prison and how it is seen. And I really believe that the closed prison system, it's a redundant system and it's not sustainable at all. Especially after the pandemic, it's proven that this is a system which cannot survive at all. Yeah. So we should look for more sustainable alternatives and deal with crime from a different perspective, you see. So yes, I think right now, like a lot of changes in law, with some of the organizations and one organization working on drafting law, and they are fantastic with their work. So redefining the laws are very important, and like redefining the prison system and the policing system is very, very important. Should be a prime focus on policy. Yeah.
No, I think I would in fact recommend listeners to check out PAAR and the very interesting work that they do in this space. So with that, Smita, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the podcast, and we hope to have you soon in another one. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Carl.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.